Welcome to the FInding Fluency Podcast, a podcast that aims to bring awareness to cluttering at the fluency disorder and give people with clutter a voice, sense of community, and support. In this podcast, you hear personal stories from myself and others as we share our experiences when it comes to cluttering and how we tackle our day-to-day challenges while working to improve our intelligibility and confidence. Hello and welcome to the FInding Fluency Podcast, Episode 1. My name is Anthony Daniels. I'm a husband, father, entrepreneur, and I'm also someone who clutters. My goal with this podcast is to shed light on cluttering at the fluency disorder, as well as become a resource for others looking to find out more information about cluttering. As I share my personal experiences and interview others to build a sense of community for those who clutter. And as a disclaimer, I do want to mention that I am not a professional speech-language pathologist. However, I was diagnosed with cluttering by a professional SLP. In this episode, I'll talk about what cluttering is, share some information about the causes and the diagnosis, and discuss my personal experiences living with cluttering and the importance of having a support system, and talk about cluttering awareness. So, what is cluttering? Cluttering is described to be a fluency disorder, and according to the American Speech-Language Hearing Association, they report that a fluency disorder is an interruption of speaking that is characterized by atypical speech rate, rhythm, and its fluencies, which can be repetition of sounds, syllables, words, and or phrases. In contrast, cluttering is characterized by the rate of speech, or irregular speech rate, unusual pauses, decreased rate of fluency issues, mazing behaviors, collapsing or omitting syllables, as well as other few characteristics. So I've struggled with speech my entire life, and I remember taking speech therapy from grade school all the way throughout high school. And so I know that there are some of you that have been diagnosed currently, as well as others looking for more information. And so I hope that my sharing my personal experiences helps you take the step in getting treatment, as well as finding more support. So I want to kind of share some examples now that I've been diagnosed with cluttering. And one of those is when when I tend to speak about a topic that I'm not, very familiar with, this causes me to constantly restart what I'm saying while trying to, organize my thoughts and not lose my train of thought. Another time that I noticed that when I clutter is when I can talk about something that I'm very knowledgeable about. So sometimes I can get carried away and not focus on my speech rate or my intelligibility, which I know can also be affecting my listener, my message to my listener, and not really get my message across in the way I'm trying to get it across. And sometimes I know I can cause to ramble, get into various tangents, and ultimately sometimes take over a conversation without realizing I've taken over the conversation until the other listener is either very quiet or disinterested in what I'm saying. So moving on to the causes and diagnosis of cluttering. Currently at the time of this recording, there is not enough information to identify what exactly causes cluttering. And so through some further research, when I've watched some videos, others report that before they were actually diagnosed with stuttering, and then later in life they were actually diagnosed with cluttering. So in the past, before being diagnosed, the feedback I'd often get from people is that I would speak too fast, I'd mumble, I wouldn't enunciate, and I've often asked to repeat myself quite a few times. And so until I was diagnosed, I've never heard of the term cluttering. And so now that, I've been diagnosed, and knowing that it's not just the way that I talk, that there is a name for this, has kind of had a weight lifted off my shoulders. I've had some embarrassing experiences. And so one of them, a couple of them I'll share with you here today is before I used to work at a small call center. And, it was about maybe 5 people or 7 people. And during our training calls, we'd have to review our calls with our coworkers. And the feedback that I often got was, I need to enunciate, I need to slow down, and, not mumble. And, being in the group in front of everyone, listening to our live calls, it was one of the most, embarrassing experiences that I've had, throughout my life. Further thinking is just how I talked. And so while I tried to not mumble, I tried to focus on slowing down. I didn't have any of the knowledge and the techniques that I have now since being diagnosed. So another experience that I've had before being diagnosed is I had tried to interview for another job at one point in time, in which the hiring manager didn't want to hire me. And unfortunately, I heard from my friend who was, I guess, kindly enough to tell me, I don't know, was saying, hey, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but they said that they couldn't hire you because of your communication skills. So not really knowing what that meant left me frustrated, because at the time I thought, I answered every question they threw at me to the best of my ability with confidence, and so, I understand that being a candidate, but not for communication issues. As far as I was concerned, my communication skills were fine. So, which, left a lot of self-doubt and, ultimately brought down a lot of confidence. So I wanted to share these vulnerable and personal experiences because I know that there are others out there struggling with this and going through the same things that I've gone through and still do at times. However, since starting speech therapy and, working with my speech therapist has helped me learn more about myself and to know that, I'm not the only one struggling with cluttering. That there are others also struggling as well. A great book and resource that my SOP has introduced me to is Too Fast for Words. And reading through this book has helped me discover so many stories about myself and about people who clutter like me that I felt like I could relate to. And so it also helped me realize that cluttering is not who we are, it's something that we do. And while, it helped me, reading this book helped me discover, so many stories about other people who clutter like me, and they shared their vulnerable stories that I could relate to, personally. And so it was very helpful to read through those stories and know that I'm not alone and that there is a community out there and there are other people who clutter. So on the other side of that, I've also realized as someone who clutters, when you're in treatment, I play a significant role in my treatment and my cluttering. So while every interaction may not be perfect, I also realize that there are things that we can do to make sure that our message comes across clearer to our listeners. Since I've been in speech therapy, I've been more hypersensitive to people's facial expressions and body language. So when I notice someone's facial expressions change or their body language is kind of changing when I'm talking, I try to make sure that I'm checking my rate of speech and trying to take pauses where I can to gather my thoughts. There are still a lot of times where I'm not aware and I have a full-blown conversation and then minutes later I go, did they get what I was saying? Did I make sense? So cluttering has affected, all parts of my life, but being more aware of it. And so, thankfully I have a spouse that's supportive and, lets me know that, hey, I didn't understand what you said, or hey, that was too fast, but she's encouraging to help me through my process. Other times, being an entrepreneur, I had a conversation with my speech therapist in that I'd rather email people rather than cold call. And the reason is I can change and however I see fit to get my message. I'd rather call, which was, had a conversation with my speech therapist, which was, I'd rather email, new people rather than cold calling. And the reason is I can change and make my message sound more clear and concise. Because when cold calling, oftentimes I lose my train of thought. I have a bazillion things in my head, and my message comes across unclear. I want to share some techniques that were introduced to me by my speech therapist, which kind of helped me manage my cluttering. And so one of those is having something written out, like this podcast, as an example. This helps me stay organized with my thoughts, and helps me to make sure that I have pauses in my my conversations. Although it's still not perfect, but I'm working through the process. Another thing is being an entrepreneur, I have to reach out to people to make phone calls, so before I would just call without having anything in front of me. And so now when I'm calling someone, I try to have a general script typed up in front of me on the computer or my phone so that I can read it and kind of help me stay organized and get the information I need for a phone call. I'm still working on this one. I struggle with this one a lot, is waiting a few seconds to gather my thoughts before I speak. And so that's one thing I'm also working on. And so pausing and being aware of what I'm saying. So one other thing I'm really working on is pausing. So not the best at this, but I'm trying. So I noticed for me that when I take a few seconds, I can kind of gather my thoughts and kind of respond to someone in a more concise way. There are the times that when someone asks me a question, I've kind of answered immediately, which I find that I get, my organization gets interrupted. I speak fast, and ultimately my intelligibility goes out the window. Another one I'm working on is to ask for feedback. So when I explain to someone, whether it's a client, whether it's my son, whether it's my wife, I try to ask for feedback. Did that make sense? Does I have them read back or explain to me what I said, so that way I know that my message got across clear. So being someone who clutters, it can be daunting, it can be frustrating. To be transparent, it's probably taking me longer to record this episode than I would like, but that's just me going through the process. And we have to tell ourselves that as people who clutter, we are smart and we are capable of doing things. It has nothing to do with our intellectual ability. So if you're listening to this for yourself because you're someone who clutters, or you're listening to this because you are listening to this for someone who clutters, then I encourage you to be patient with them, be supportive, and understand that they're trying to get their message to you in the best way possible, what makes sense for them. But also, if something didn't come clear, ask them to, politely repeat themselves and be patient. And so, and understand that it's more, it's not just slowing down, it's more than that. So as episode 1 comes to a close, I want to thank you for your time and support for listening to the FInding Fluency Podcast. My name is Anthony Daniels. Episodes will come out every 2 weeks, and you can listen to us on Spotify, YouTube, and all other platforms where podcasts are hosted. Until then, I'll see you in the next episodes.